Being a police officer can often be dangerous, but within the Australian Federal Police, there's a special division of cops whose role is so constantly treacherous, every day is a matter of life and death. They're undercover operatives who work at the very front line of crime fighting. You'd think protecting these officers would be an at-all-costs priority. But when the AFP conducted a high-level investigation into its undercover program, it found major failings that risked compromising operations and lives. Now police insiders are spilling long-held secrets in the hope of ensuring accountability and reform. There's an obvious difficulty organising an interview with someone who spends their life in the shadows. The person I'm going to meet knows of a world so secretive and so dangerous. Talking about it carries incredible risk. In fact, just getting to this point has required something of a covert operation of our own. Our source has insisted on a secret location and won't be filmed until it's dark. 5 minutes off. He's fearful of talking to me because doing so goes against the orders of the agency he serves. But with extraordinary precautions in place, he is prepared to speak out. Good to see you. It might seem like an over-the-top disguise, but the man behind the mask can't risk anyone knowing his identity. He is an Australian Federal Police insider, and for his own protection, he's requested we don't show his face or use his real voice. Why can't you show your face?
I'm still a serving member of the AFP. If they knew my identity, they would charge me and I'd lose my job.
You'd be charged with leaking to the media?
Absolutely.
So why take the risk?
Because without it, I'm worried people will be killed.
This man is blowing the whistle on the AFP's elite undercover program. From infiltrating drug cartels to embedding with suspected extremists, covert operatives take on the most dangerous role in our police force. How vital was the work of these undercovers to keeping Australians safe?
Oh, it's extremely vital. It's protecting the very culture that we all enjoy living. They were deploying offshore to countries from Colombia to Mexico, Dubai, all through America, Europe, Asia. They were deploying to these very dangerous people, trying to stop the crime or the drugs or whatever it was from entering the country in the first place.
But tonight, in a joint investigation with the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, we can reveal the AFP undercover program has faced major problems, systemic failures that risked the safety of covert agents.
The cutting of resources within the AFP's program, it had enormous impact on the members in there, particularly those who were deploying against very, very high-level targets in, foreign countries and against extremely dangerous people domestically.
I've been speaking to a number of AFP insiders with grave concerns about the danger faced by the undercovers. The man on the other end of the phone is a former federal police officer. We've recreated this conversation to protect his identity, but he believes it's time the public learnt of just how bad it got for the AFP's secret agents.
I constantly hear all the good news stories from the AFP, but you've got people putting their lives on the line to try to do this type of work, basically thrown to the wolves. I think it's disgusting, particularly when the AFP had known.
When I first started investigating this story, I was sceptical. I learnt that some agents had serious concerns, but felt it unlikely the Australian Federal Police could have so badly mismanaged its undercover program. But then I discovered the existence of a classified inquiry, commissioned by the agency itself. Finished in late 2020, its findings are absolutely scathing, documenting a history of serious failings and ignored calls for reform.
Undercover work is addictive. Some people have described it like a drug addict gets hooked on heroin. He has that huge high and he chases it for the rest of his life. And that's what undercover work is. You have a huge
The very
buzz.
nature of being an undercover officer means there are only a few people who can talk openly about it. Damian Marrett is one of them. How deep did you go as an undercover?
Pretty much You were on call 24 hours a day, assumed identities, living in places that were registered in different names, dealing with organised crime units that could drop in at any time of the day or night. So you were pretty much living your whole life making sure you were undercover.
A covert operative for state police deploying in New South Wales and Victoria in the 1990s. Marrett's shocked to learn that decades on, a secret inquiry found the AFP hadn't done all it could to protect its undercovers.
Look, it leaves me feeling a little bit sick because I have spoken to a hell of a lot of undercovers and police members, and I would have hoped that we'd got to a stage after, the change of the century that things were being put in place.
The alarming accounts are backed up by the classified inquiry into the Undercover program, which was conducted by former Assistant Commissioner Frank Prendergast. It found systemic underfunding and mismanagement and warned that operatives risked compromise by using out-of-date and not fit-for-purpose equipment. Police also had to borrow technology from other agencies and deal with critical tech failing during covert deployments.
The instance that you've got to borrow devices from another squad, unit, whatever, there's a serious problem. Are you serious about the undercover unit and its undercover operatives, or aren't you?
One of the most shocking failings Prendergast discovered was a tech bungle that meant the AFP lost track of an operative during a live operation.
I was told that the people back listening to what was going on at the meeting were no longer able to see, hear or know what was going on. And those things could occur for long periods of time, from maybe 2 minutes to 2 hours.
The equipment failed.
The equipment failed.
And the undercovers disappeared.
They didn't know where they were and they couldn't hear them.
The tracking of the undercovers failed.
It's very difficult. I can't go into things like that could give away methodology, but the support mechanisms, the fundamentals that should have been in place, that are expected, that are the bare essentials when you're doing that sort of work, simply weren't working effectively.
How on earth could that be allowed to happen?
I have no idea.
There's arguably nothing worse than losing ears and eyes on your undercover. The troubling incident happened in Central America, when undercover tracking technology suddenly stopped working, apparently because of a failure to renew a software subscription.
It's a very scary prospect, and I've been in that situation where we haven't been able to use devices for certain reasons, and we haven't had cover for an hour away. And it is the scariest thing, because if something does go wrong, who's going to help you?
You're on your own.
You're on your own.
For an undercover cop to do their work safely, they rely on extensive background checks to ensure criminal targets don't know each other. But the Prendergast inquiry found that this wasn't being properly done, posing a real risk to covert agents that their cover might be blown.
I mean, how bad was it getting?
Well, I think it got to the point where people, the same operative, may have been deploying on 2 separate jobs under 2 different names with links between those jobs.
It sounds an obvious question, but that could really expose them.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And the consequence of that?
Well, depending on the target, but serious injury or death isn't out of the picture.
But as you're about to see, some of our supposedly most covert cops were being put in very overt positions.
You should not be doing undercover work in the community that you live and work in.
The ultimate masters of deception, undercover cops are used to hiding in plain sight. Their job is to infiltrate the most dangerous criminal gangs in the world, securing evidence straight from the source.
It was exceptionally high stakes. The targets that they were deploying against were the top level, high as you can get. Now, you combine that with just the general nature of undercover work, and it was incredibly, incredibly dangerous.
We've been speaking to Australian Federal Police insiders who say chronic mismanagement and underfunding plagued the undercover program for years, risking the compromise of agents in the field.
There was a huge sense the program was in trouble and it wasn't operating as it should be. and I don't think anyone who worked there for the last 15 years would disagree.
The problems with the Undercover program were bad enough to force the AFP to launch its own classified inquiry. This secret probe, carried out by former Assistant Commissioner Frank Prendergast and finished in late 2020, is scathing in its findings. For instance, Prendergast found some agents were working part-time as undercovers, while also serving in police uniform at the airport, creating a risk they could bump into their criminal targets, blowing their cover.
I think if you're a part-time operative that's operating in an environment where you've fooled or tricked someone, and the next day you're working at the airport and they come and see you, that creates a significant risk.
What concerns, what red flags does that raise?
Look, without giving away methodology, you should never play in your own backyard. You should not be doing undercover work in the community that you live and work in.
After a 25-year career in national security, it takes a lot to shock former AFP intelligence coordinator John Coyne. But he says it's unthinkable that undercover operatives were not being given the support they needed to do their dangerous jobs well.
I don't think there is an excuse. If the cost is too high, then we shouldn't have undercovers. And I think it needs to be that. You can't have be halfway between. You either protect and look after your people appropriately, providing them the support they need, or you don't have an undercover program.
A key layer of protection is the assumed identities undercovers use while on the job. These fake personas allow them to convincingly deceive their targets. But in some cases, officers deploying overseas on assumed identities were having to use their real passports for travel.
To send people overseas under their real identity on a government passport was crazy. If you're doing that, there's really no point in being issued identities.
The Prendergast inquiry also discovered how secret fake identities were shared with now disgraced consulting firm PwC, after it was hired by the AFP to do auditing.
If somebody's doing a dangerous job with dangerous criminals, and somebody who isn't even a policeman or connected to, the police force in that way, has access to people's assumed names and details, hello? No.
Former State Police Detective Damian Marrett knows better than most just how important it is for covert agents to be fully protected. He was involved in 60 successful operations, but says it was difficult and dangerous work that took a toll.
What I found was I wasn't the same person. I didn't have the spark or, I'll call it charisma or whatever it is. It was gone. I could turn it on and pretend, but it wasn't real anymore.
Was there a moment where you simply broke?
Yeah, I'm fine now, but, I ended up at a stage where I had totally lost the plot. I was living in a dark tunnel, alcohol abuse, substance abuse,
It's been more than a decade since Marrett handed in his Victoria Police badge. But according to the Prendergast inquiry, it's been federal police undercovers who have more recently been pushed to the edge. His secret inquiry found the undercover program failed to provide proper mental health support and lacked empathy towards struggling officers, a situation made worse by the scrapping of a dedicated psychologist.
I've known of multiple members who were off on stress leave for months on end. Some medically retired because of it. So, I think they've got a lot to answer for in why things like welfare and full-time psychs were taken out of that program.
The AFP has overhauled its undercover program, but some problems still persist. Commissioner Reece Kershaw recently privately flagged the appointment of a retired judge to deal with 3 ex-undercovers who say they and their families haven't been properly supported. It's clear reform is needed. And if the AFP doesn't get it right, its ability to fight serious crime will be compromised.
It provides you with the type of intelligence and the type of evidence that you can prosecute really difficult targets.
You're saying it's absolutely critical that Australia has an undercover corps doing this work?
Absolutely. The truth is that the capability isn't at where it needs to be to serve the Australian Federal Police and the Australian people going forward.
The AFP is adamant that changes demanded by Prendergast have been both prioritised and put in place. But our insiders say there's no room for error.
If things aren't fixed, what's the cost?
Human life.
Hello, I'm Nick McKenzie. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. Don't miss out on our extra minute segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.